The Wehrmacht. German soldiers have overrun Europe under the command of Adolf Hitler. Untold thousands of soldiers have witnessed atrocities committed on defenseless civilians. Time and again, soldiers' officers have come into conflict with their conscience, but few are prepared to take responsibility for their actions. How much leeway did individual officers and soldiers have? 10 million were deployed on the Eastern Front in a war of annihilation. Carrying out Hitler's plans? Or was this the Wehrmacht's own war? Did it turn them into ruthless murderers? Or is barbarity an inevitable part of war? What role did the Wehrmacht play in the crimes committed in Germany's name? Human rights were brutally violated and international laws broken in many theaters of war. Crimes against civilians, against prisoners of war, participation in the Holocaust. Crime after crime is documented. What did ordinary soldiers see or hear of them? How far were they involved?
Wir hatten andere Sorgen, muss ich ehrlich sagen, was die Leute machten, waren sehr, ja, Hauptsache, wir kamen einigermaßen heraus, ja.
Ich habe meine Pflicht tun müssen, verstehen Sie? Ich kann nicht sagen, jetzt sehe ich, das ist schief. Da kann ich nicht ausscheren, das geht nicht.
Und da guckten wir durch das kleine Fenster raus und sahen dort an einer Reihe aufgehängt Menschen, tote Menschen aufgehängt.
Die Wehrmacht war im Grunde sauber. Ich habe nur anständige Menschen kennengelernt, kann es nicht anders sagen.
Ja, dann konnte auch schon einmal die Hand hochgehoben haben, dann haben einige Kameraden trotzdem geschossen. Nicht? Aber das war auf der anderen Seite genauso.
Wir haben nur gesagt, dass das ein Wahnsinn ist, ja? Dass man sich irgendwelche Leute greift, ja? und die dann da aufhängen. Nicht? Ja, furchtbar.
Es gab unter Soldaten, die gibt es schon bei jeder Einheit, gab es ausgesprochene Schweinehunde. Denen war nichts heilig, die gab es da bei uns.
Recently, the question of crimes committed by the German army has been more closely examined. Bitter public disputes have encouraged new studies. The results are complex. Illegal orders were issued, crimes against humanity were committed. But there were also soldiers who followed the voice of their conscience. Newly discovered files of the British Secret Service. They reveal what the German military elite was really thinking. All the generals who became British prisoners of war had their conversations recorded round the clock. The 10,000 pages of transcripts offer a unique insight into the thinking of the German military elite. The men who had military responsibility for Hitler's war had always lived in a world apart. Shaped by World War I, they went on to serve a ruthless dictator. 84 of the Wehrmacht's 3,000 generals were housed in a luxury prisoner of war camp, Trent Park, near London. Their conversations reveal what they really thought, thanks to the hidden microphones of the British Secret Service. General Heinrich Eberbach is a prisoner here. So too is his son, Eugen, a hardliner. But Heinrich Eberbach is beginning to have doubts. The British Secret Service were astonished by so much frankness.
You might go as far as to say the million Jews, or however many of them we've killed, well, that had to be in the interests of our nation. But the women and children, that was unnecessary. That's where we went too far.
Well, if Jews have to go, then the women and children do too, or at least the children. You don't have to do it in public. But what good does it do just to get rid of the old people?
It's too inhumane. How many Polacks have we killed? We killed at least 1 million of them. How many did we kill in Yugoslavia? I never knew about that.
I was never part of that. How many Russians have we killed? Not just Poles.
Like Heinrich Eberbach, many generals are plagued by guilt. Historian Sönke Neitzel discovered and evaluated the transcripts. He found a revealing openness in the conversations of these high-ranking prisoners.
Es ist ja eine ganz besondere Situation, in der sich die Generäle in Trent Park befunden haben. Sie waren ja herausgerissen aus ihren alten Bezügen der Wehrmacht des Dritten Reiches und sie waren noch nicht wieder angekommen in der Bundesrepublik. Also eine Interimsphase, in der sie sozusagen orientierungslos waren und frei von anderen Bezügen sich neu verorten mussten, frei nachgedacht haben. Und zwar freier nachgedacht haben als vorher und freier nachgedacht haben als nachher. Also eine einmalige Situation, deswegen haben diese Dokumente auch einen ganz besonderen Wert.
The prisoners at Trent Park talked more about war crimes than any other subject.
Sie haben die Dimension erkannt dieses Menschheitsverbrechens, was sich dort vollzogen hat. Und das hat sie beschäftigt, weil das einem gewissen Wertehorizont widerstrebte. Das entsprach dem nicht. Auf der anderen Seite waren sie drin involviert. Sie waren ja Teil der Wehrmacht. Sie hatten Kommandogewalt. Also wie bringt man das in Einklang? Das ist eine quälende Frage gewesen, die diese Generäle Monate und Jahre lang beschäftigt hat.
The war in the East was to become a war of unprecedented barbarity. Many Wehrmacht soldiers find themselves in fierce combat for the first time.
Was uns gesagt wurde, ist, die Russen sind Schweine, die Russen machen keine Gefangenen, die Russen stechen Gefangenen die Augen aus und ähnliche Geschichten. Diese Gräuelpropaganda hörten wir, aber mehr auch nicht.
Horror propaganda. Peter Schilling grew up well protected in a parsonage. At 18, he volunteered enthusiastically for the Wehrmacht, even though his parents were anti-Nazi.
Ich wollte zur Kriegsmarine. Einer meiner Onkels war Konteradmiral, oder wurde dann später, damals war er noch Kapitän zur See, war später Konteradmiral. Und ich wollte sogar ein Offizier werden. Und ich fand das schick, mit so einer schicken Mütze auf. Aber ich wurde dann abgelehnt, weil damals noch die Kriegsmarine nur Menschen haben wollte, die keinen Seefehler hatten. Und ich hatte irgendwie, war ein bisschen kurzsichtig. Ein halbes Jahr später hatten sie mich mit Kusshand genommen, aber da wollte ich dann nicht mehr.
Max Gotthard grew up as an orphan in Hamburg. It was a tough upbringing, but all the hard knocks of childhood couldn't prepare him for the experience of war, like losing your best friend.
Das war ein Kamerad aus Düsseldorf und wir mussten irgendeine komische Höhe da erobern und wir mussten bergauf. Der geriet in Maschinengewehrfeuer und ist von oben bis unten durchgeschossen worden. Und da habe ich mich übergeben. Und das war aber nachher gang und gäbe. Aber das war bitter.
Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the Armed Forces High Command, had issued his notorious Commissar order before the Russian campaign had even started. It called for the execution of Red Army political commissars as soon as they were captured. The commissars were political propagandists. They enforced discipline in Soviet ranks, if necessary, by force. They could be identified by the red star on their sleeve.
Den Befehl hat uns also gepflichtgemäß, so sagte er, unser Kompaniechef, an diesem Abend vorgelesen. Und er fügte dazu etwas, was hat sie eingeprägt, weil wir das alle als eine große, also mit großem Mut verbunden haben. Er sagte, ich habe Ihnen das vorgelesen, weil ich es musste. Was jeder davon zu halten hat, muss er mit seinem Gewissen abmachen. Und das haben wir also als ganz großartige offene Stellungnahme gegen einen Befehl angenommen. Und wir hatten also große Hochachtung vor unserem Kompaniechef, dass er sowas gesagt hatte.
Only a few soldiers can or want to remember that the Commissar order was actually carried out.
Jeden Morgen wurden die immer Kommissare unter die Gefangenen rausgeholt. Und die wurden dann erschossen. Da waren so alte Schützengräben, mussten sich hinsetzen und da war aber, glaube ich, eine Polizeieinheit, die haben unsere Leute nicht erschossen.
For a long time, it was said that the Commissar order was only carried out in exceptional cases. But just recently, a young historian has taken the time to check the records of compliance or non-compliance with the order.
In der Zeit des laufenden Feldzuges zeigte sich die Bereitschaft der deutschen Truppen und Stäbe, den Kommissarbefehl zu befolgen. Die Auswertung der deutschen Akten hat ergeben, dass bei allen Armeen, bei allen deutschen Armeekorps und über 80% der deutschen Divisionen der Kommissarbefehl ausgeführt worden ist, beziehungsweise Kommissarerschießungen in den Akten nachweisbar sind.
And that was true of the 6th Army, commanded by Field Marshal Walter von Reichenau. His father had been a Prussian general, and he became an officer after high school. He met Hitler in 1932, before the Nazis came to power, and he was soon an enthusiastic supporter. Being a loyal party member makes him an exception among the generals. In autumn 1939, Reichenau learns that Hitler intends to invade France. They discuss the plan several times. Historian Tim Richter has studied Reichenau's career for several years. He has made some interesting discoveries.
Als einer der wenigen höheren Offiziere hatte Reichenau erkannt, dass es wichtig ist, direkten Zugang zum Diktator zu haben. Das war für viele unter der Würde, oder die haben gesagt, mit Politik wollen wir nichts zu tun haben, wir haben jetzt mit der Aufrüstung genug zu tun, sodass es häufige Besuche, häufige Treffen mit Reichenau Hitler gegeben hat.
Reichenau tries to talk Hitler out of his plans on military grounds. He fails, and Hitler is annoyed.
Nach einer Ansprache Hitlers an die Generalität, als klar war, Hitler lässt sich von dem Entschluss zum Angriff nicht abbringen, hat er sich mit einer der führenden Persönlichkeiten des bürgerlichen Widerstandes, Karl Goerdeler, in Leipzig getroffen. Und beide kamen zu dem Ergebnis, dass ein Angriff Deutschlands im Westen 1939 eben verheerende Folgen haben würde. Das Einzige, diesen zu verhindern, wäre, wenn die Angriffspläne bekannt werden würden.
After the meeting, Goerdeler leaks Reichenau's information to the British government. Reichenau is prepared to commit treason in order to counter Hitler's decision. But just 18 months later, Reichenau shows a completely different side in the Russian campaign. Bila Tserkva in the Ukraine, mid-August 1941. Reichenau's 6th Army advances into the town and takes it without a battle. Special units of the SS begin to murder Jewish civilians.
Было объявлено по радио, чтобы все евреи одели свои повязки, знаете, шестиконечная звездочка, да? Чтобы они все одели вот этот свой знак. И они вынуждены были одеть этот знак. А потом, где-то, считайте, наверное, 2 недельки, 3 недельки, может, 4 недельки, все-таки я была 12 лет, мне было, да, собирали и гнали на расстрел. Значит, уничтожали евреев. Когда мы даже с мамой видели эту колонну, когда шла колонна евреев, да.
More than 800 Jews were shot dead in Bila Tserkva. The Wehrmacht's field command supplied logistic support for mass murder.
Ich habe das gesehen, habe gedacht, warum machen die Leute vor dem Purzelbaum? Machen Purzelbaum und sind weg. Stehen eine Reihe Leute da und machen gleichzeitig einen Purzelbaum. Was soll das? Das habe ich gedacht. Ne? Und bin ja hingegangen, bis ich gesehen habe, dass die erschossen werden. und sind die Grube reingefallen.
What should be done with the 90 children left over? For the time being, they're locked up in a schoolroom. An army driver takes a few officers over to investigate.
Kleine Kinder von 2, 3 Jahren und auch von 10, 12 Jahren verlumpt angezogen. Allgemein ist das ja so gewesen bei den Kindern in Russland. Das muss ich dazu sagen. Es könnte sein, dass die vielleicht 3, 4 Tage oder 2 Tage oder 5 Tage da drin gewesen sind. Also geschrien und rumgebrillt oder irgendwie was haben sie nicht. Die waren ganz ruhig da in dem Zimmer, wo wir waren.
Lieutenant Colonel Helmut Grosskurt, a staff officer with the division that made its headquarters in the town, writes this report.
The rooms were filled with about 90 children. There was an indescribable amount of filth. Rags, diapers, refuse lay everywhere. Countless flies covered the children, some of whom were naked. Almost all the children were crying or whimpering. The stench was unbearable. In the above-mentioned case, measures were taken against women and children which were no different from atrocities committed by the enemy.
Grosskurt insists that 6th Army headquarters make a decision. Are the children who are imprisoned without provisions really going to be murdered? Talks are held. Grosskurt is granted a postponement. Now the decision is in the hands of Walter von Reichenau, Commander-in-Chief of the 6th Army. Killing small children poses no problem for him. He issues the order to Grosskurt in writing.
I have decided, as a matter of principle, that once such an action is started, it should be carried out in an expedient fashion.
All the children are murdered. Soon afterwards, Reichenau issues an order covering the conduct of troops in the Eastern Territories. He speaks of the war of annihilation, the Asiatic Jewish threat, and the pitiless extermination of alien treachery. Ugly words, which had ugly consequences.
In den Akten der unterstellten Verbände der 6. Armee aus der Folgezeit lässt sich die Wirkung dieses Befehls besonders deutlich ablesen. Denn bei den unterstellten Verbänden der 6. Armee schnellten in der Zeit nach diesem Reichenau-Befehl die Erschießungsziffern von Zivilisten und Partisanen sprunghaft in die Höhe.
It's not known how many frontline soldiers knew about the work of the murder squads. However, quite apart from the Reichenau order, there were so many executions and so many victims, it was impossible to keep them a secret. With the massacre of the children of Bila Tserkva and his provocative order that followed, Reichenau has distinguished himself as a loyal Nazi. Within months, he's promoted to Commander-in-Chief, Army Group South, apparently back in favor with Hitler. The eastwards advance continues. The 6th Army marches to the Volga. The 11th Army moves further south towards the Crimea. Dietrich von Koltitz is a colonel in the 11th Army. Born on an estate in Silesia, he entered the cadet corps at the tender age of 13. He will be captured in August 1944.
Koltitz war sicherlich ein sehr fähiger General, der sehr schnell Karriere gemacht hat. Ein Frontmann, ein Frontsoldat, der seit 1940 in vorderster Front stand und hier sehr erfolgreich gekämpft hat. Ein Mann, der erstaunlich reflektiert sich äußert. Auf der anderen Seite ein Choleriker, der auch sicherlich von seiner eigenen Wichtigkeit überzeugt war und der deswegen sehr schnell bei seinen Kameraden in Trent Park unbeliebt gewesen ist und keiner wollte mit ihm so wirklich was zu tun haben.
Like many other generals in British captivity, he talked almost compulsively about the crimes he'd witnessed. At the end of the Crimean campaign, Colonel von Koltitz, later promoted to general, briefly returned to Germany. On the way home, he experienced something that's still on his mind years later.
I arrived one day, sometime after the fall of Sevastopol. The airfield commander came over to me, and I could hear gunshots. "Are you doing an exercise?" I asked. And he said, "For heaven's sake, I can't talk here. They've been shooting Jews for days.
The Crimean Peninsula plays an important role in Hitler's racial obsession. For once in the distant past, a German tribe, the Goths, had settled here. Now most of the ethnic groups are to be deported from the region, and the Jews are to be executed. In the British Secret Service recordings, General von Koltitz seriously incriminates himself.
The most difficult assignment I have ever carried out, with the greatest thoroughness, I might add, is the liquidation of the Jews. I fulfill this assignment with ultimate conviction.
There's a thriving Jewish community in the port city of Sebastopol. As soon as the Germans occupy the city, SS Special Task Force D begins its persecution of the Jews, often with the support of the Wehrmacht.
Этот дом, где мы жили, там, как национально, там жили иудеи, греки, и все национальности у нас примерно жили. Но я там дружил с этой семьей, которой мы вместе учились в одной школе. Вот, его фамилия, звали его Яков, а фамилия была их Трейвас. И мы одногодки были вместе с ним. И учились только по разным классам. Вот. И когда уже немцы пришли, они за кругом написали объявление, что такой-то возраст, не знаю, все евреи должны были прийти в этот самый, в комендатуру, вот этот самый, где евреев там этот самый, оттуда увозили на расстрел. Я говорю, давай я тебя спрячу. А он говорит, нет, я останусь с родителями, я вот никуда их не брошу.
Yakov did not survive. Historian Norbert Kuntz has studied events in the Crimea during the war.
Vor dem deutschen Einmarsch lebten rund 65.000 Juden auf der Krim. Ein Großteil konnte allerdings fliehen, bevor die deutschen Invasoren die Krim erreichten. Andere Juden kamen aus dem Raum Odessa hinzu. Anhand von verschiedenen statistischen Angaben können wir heute ersehen, dass maximal 35.000 Ostjuden, daneben 3.000 Krimtschaken, die den Juden zugerechnet wurden, und ca. 100 Bergjuden, daneben 2.000 Roma auf der Krim verblieben waren, den Deutschen in die Hand fielen und letztlich das Ende der deutschen Besatzung im Jahr 1944 nicht überlebten.
Few of the execution sites are known today.
Bei der Judenvernichtung, beim Holocaust, ist es unbestritten, dass der hauptsächliche Teil dieser Verbrechen von der SS, von den Einsatzgruppen durchgeführt worden ist. Ohne die Wehrmacht wäre dieses Verbrechen in diesem Ausmaß allerdings nicht möglich gewesen. Die Wehrmacht hat den Holocaust teils passiv, teils aktiv unterstützt. Ohne die Wehrmacht hätte es diesen Genozid nicht gegeben.
Many knew about or participated in the mass murders. Afterwards, no one likes to remember these atrocities. Nevertheless, racist theories still shape their thinking. Just before the end of the war, Lieutenant General Heinrich Kittel gives a perfect example.
Oh well, these Jews were the plague of the East. They should have been put somewhere and given something useful to do. By the way, whatever knowledge I may have of these things, I'm keeping my mouth shut as long as I can, until they actually put me on trial.
At the small town of Krupki in White Russia, Wehrmacht units take part in the murder of Jews. A former infantry soldier remembers.
Abends zuvor kam unser Zugführer, war Leutnant, Leutnant Heider oder Heiber oder wie er hieß, nicht wahr? Der kam und sagte, Jungs, morgen haben wir eine schwere Aufgabe. Wer nicht mitmachen will, braucht nicht mitmachen. Da hat ja keiner sich gemeldet und sagt, ich mache nicht mit. Und nachts um 2 war Alarm, wurde die ganze Stadt Krupke umstellt, von den Schützenkompanien oder von unserer MG-Kompanie. Wir sind da so in die Häuser reingegangen und haben gesagt, hier raus und nach Marktplatz, nach Marktplatz.
The Jews are herded out of the town to nearby marshland.
Und so tiefe Sumpfgräben, tiefe Gräben wie die Stube, ne? Und auf einmal hieß alles halt, Soldaten Abstand nehmen.
И потом, когда подвели к этой яме, сказали, что мы вас будем расстреливать семьями.
Dann mussten sie eine tiefe Böschung runter und dann mussten sich alle mit dem Gesicht so hinsetzen und hier dahinter waren die tiefen Gräben. Und dann mussten immer 10 Leute die Oberkleidung frei machen und immer am laufenden Band und mussten das vor den Graben stellen.
Wehrmacht soldiers guard the execution site while the executions take place. The edges of the mass graves are lined with planks.
И вот так 2 доски вот такие вот широкие стоять, обнимаются семьей, и немец стреляет. Там его некий небольшенький пулеметчик был, вот, и стреляет, и валются в эту ямку.
Kriegt immer Genickschuss, da putzelt immer einer auf den anderen drauf, unten in den Graben rein.
Miraculously, Sofia Shalaumova survives the shooting.
Стреляют люди, падают в эти ямки. Ну и дошла ж очередь до нас. И я не могу вам сказать, или я хотела увалиться в эту ямку, или это случайность была. И я живая увалилась в ямку эту.
Nobody notices she's still alive. She manages to escape the mass grave before it's covered over and hidden for the rest of the war. But every day, ordinary soldiers could come across shocking examples of their colleagues' disdain for Jewish lives. Like the scene witnessed by Peter Schilling in Stalino in the Ukraine, present-day Donetsk.
Eine schwangere Frau, deutlich schwanger, einen dicken Bauch, aber hat auch einen Säugling noch auf dem Arm. Und die konnte nicht schnell genug auf einen LKW steigen. Und da hat ihr ein Soldat, ein Wehrmachtsangehöriger, ein Soldat das Baby weggerissen, hat es auf den LKW geschmissen, der für mich dunkle LKW, Frachtraum. Und dann die Frau gejagt, geknüppelt, mit seinem Gewehrkolben hinterher getrieben. Und ich war entsetzt über das, was ich da gesehen habe und erlebt habe. Und ich fragte einen der absperrenden Posten, was ist denn das für eine Sauerei hier, was passiert hier? Und der sagte zu mir ganz ruhig, ach, reg dich nicht auf, Kamerad, das sind ja nur Juden, die kommen in den Arbeitseinsatz.
Work detail, often a code name for execution. In Trent Park, Heinrich Kittel tells a typical story about something he witnessed in Latvia. He's anti-Semitic and loyal to the regime, but full of arrogance and disgust towards the special task forces of the SS.
The orderly said to me, "Colonel, you should go there. There's something to see." I just stood nearby. That was enough for me. 300 men were driven out of Düneborg, and they dug a pit. The following day, they returned, men, women, and children. They were counted, and then they were forced to undress. Then 20 of the women had to stand close to the edge of the pit, naked. They were then shot, and fell down into it.
How was it done?
They were facing the pit. Our men came up close to them and shot them through the head. One man gave the command, and 20 people fell into the pit, like clay pigeons. I went back to the car, turned to the SS man in charge, and said to him, I forbid you once and for all to do these shootings outside where everyone can watch. If you shoot them in the woods or anywhere else where nobody can see it, it's up to you. But we get our drinking water out of the wells here, and we can definitely do without corpse water.
General Kittel protests against the execution of Jews, but only because its secrecy cannot be guaranteed, and because he sees a threat to his soldiers' drinking water. In reality, the reserve units of the Wehrmacht largely cooperate in the mass murders.
In Trent Park wird eben deutlich, dass die Wehrmacht an allen großen Kriegsverbrechen des Dritten Reiches beteiligt gewesen ist. Die Gefangenen sprechen über den Holocaust, auch die Beteiligung der Wehrmacht am Holocaust. Die Gefangenen sprechen über die Ermordung der sowjetischen Kriegsgefangenen, auch die Beteiligung der Wehrmacht daran. Die Gefangenen sprechen über die Euthanasie, Geiselerschießungen und so weiter. Und in diesen Gesprächen wird eben deutlich, dass es nicht ausschließlich Verbrechen der SS, der Gestapo, des SD waren, sondern dass die Wehrmacht in führender Position an diesen Verbrechen beteiligt gewesen ist.
And yet from the very beginning, the officers and generals of the Wehrmacht try to unload responsibility for the executions onto the SS. In their luxurious prisoner of war camp, they prepare their line of defense.
The SS did things unworthy of an officer during the mass executions. Things that every German officer should have refused to do. It would be politically desirable for the German officer corps to say, we have nothing to do with these people, but I'm not sure. We would get very far by saying that. They could immediately reply, oh yes, Captain what's his name is a German army officer. Colonel What's-it is an officer. And they did exactly as the SS have done.
When I am asked to testify, whatever I say, I intend to twist it in such a way that the officer corps is cleared of everything. I'm absolutely determined.
It is still not known how many Wehrmacht soldiers were involved in the crimes. Even if, as conservative estimates indicate, it was only 5%. On the Eastern Front alone, that would be 500,000 men. According to Nazi ideology, Russians, Jews, and other minorities are subhuman. The greatest enemy is Jewish Bolshevism. And many Wehrmacht soldiers take these beliefs literally. General Wilhelm von Thoma, one of the more self-critical of the generals at Trent Park, gives a shocking example.
And then the captain says to the lieutenant, "Damn, I can't stand seeing these farmyard faces anymore." Takes out his revolver and shoots the farmer who he had personally invited over and blows him across the table.
But he was severely punished for it, the captain.
Just wait a moment. The woman screams boo murder, sits herself on the stove with her children and starts crying. The captain then says to the lieutenant, "See to it that I can get some peace and quiet." He draws his revolver and shoots the woman. There's still the girl, a 10-year-old boy and a 2-month-old little baby. Suddenly, yep, she's got to go too. And he just shoots the girl. Now it's the 10-year-old boy's turn. The captain says, "Take him outside and shoot him." He was killed by a shot to the neck. Now there was just the 2-month-old little baby left on the stove. Then he said, He chucked it down, grabbed his food, and threw it out into the snow. I had them court-martialed. The captain just said, we didn't shoot any human beings. I asked for the death penalty for both of them, a public execution, shot by their own company. They weren't punished. They were just sent to some punishment battalion.
A minority of soldiers, like Friedrich Hassenstein, are appalled by this coarsening of human nature.
Dass dann also sehr viele die Gelegenheit gerne wahrnahmen, unter diesem Vorzeichen Dinge zu tun, die sie als Zivilisten nie getan hätten, und damit ihre verborgene Neigung in der Richtung von Sadismus und Freude an der Gewalt und so weiter zeigten. Das waren sehr viele, und ich fürchte also, dass ich da von einem sehr pessimistischen Bild nicht loskomme.
Peter Schilling doesn't want to be party to this any longer. He takes action. He drives to the Swiss border.
Ich lag etwas oberhalb der Straße an einem Rand von einer Bewaldung. Habe die Straße beobachtet und ich glaube, ich habe 1 oder 2 Streifen gesehen und hatte da einen gewissen Rhythmus entdeckt. Jetzt ist eine Streife gekommen und dann wird es wahrscheinlich eine Viertelstunde dauern, bis die nächste Streife kommt oder so. Und ich dachte, ich muss runter, muss auf die Straße springen, muss dann über die Straße, muss in den Stacheldraht. Und der Stacheldraht, das war nicht einfach so ein Stacheldraht, sondern ein richtiges Drahtverhau. Da musste ich reinkriechen. Und ich wusste, in dem Moment, wo ich da reinkrieche, kann ich nicht mehr nach rechts und links ausweichen. Da kann man mich so abknallen, wie einen Hasen. Und das war ganz, ganz grausam. Das ist das einzige Mal, wo ich fürchterliche, schlotternde Angst hatte. Als ich dann durchgekrochen war, wie ein Wahnsinniger, habe ich irgendeinen Knüppel gepackt und gegen die Bäume geschlagen und Geschrei gemacht und hier bin ich, ihr könnt mich nicht mehr und kriegen und so weiter. Und ich war auf der Schweizer Seite.
While Peter Schilling is making his bolt for freedom, in the east, Soviet POWs are systematically being starved. About half the 6 million Soviet prisoners die of hunger. The German generals, now themselves prisoners, know they are guilty.
During the winter of 1941 and 42, at least 3 to 4 million people died of starvation.
They gave them too little to eat. That was the great crime. They are human beings. Even a Russian is a human being, damn it!
We acted like wild beasts, not like civilized people.
In Yugoslavia, attacks by partisans and snipers are feared more than anything else, especially since the Serbian uprising in the fall of 1941. The Wehrmacht responds on its own initiative, largely without the participation of the SS, and with extreme violence. Frequently, civilians are arbitrarily selected and killed. It violates all the rules of war, but it happens every day. Colonel Eberhard Wildemuth was a witness. In Trent Park, he describes this unpleasant period to a fellow officer.
In Serbia, I was ordered to have 100 people shot for every dead German, and 50 people for every wounded German. But I never carried out the order. In one Serbian town, when the commandant had 2 dead and 3 wounded, he rounded up 350 people and shot 200 Serbs for the dead men and 150 for the wounded. About 2,400 people were shot there. But these are things that didn't have to happen. Because I allowed this order to be carried out, for example. They'll get me for that. And they'll say, you passed this order on. And I say, well, I had to. Otherwise, I would have been shot. That's my defense. But morally, certainly no defense at all.
In Pančevo, not far from Belgrade, the situation is especially volatile in April 1941. So-called ethnic Germans live here, and 9 have been killed by sniper fire during the Wehrmacht invasion. The night before their burial, someone shoots at Wehrmacht soldiers. 2 are fatally wounded. 38 inhabitants of the town are arbitrarily arrested. A summary court-martial under the administration of the local Wehrmacht commander sentences 36 of them to death. There is no proof of their guilt.
Dogodilo se da su već osuđene 18 na streljanje, 18 na vešanje, sprovodili i pančevački Volksdeutscheri sa oružjem do groblja na kome je već bila postrojena jedna manja grupa nemačkih vojnika.
These are troops of the Greater Germany Infantry Regiment, a regular army unit. The SS is not involved in this operation. The shots had been fired at the 2 German soldiers from the Orthodox cemetery. The whole procedure is to serve as a deterrent. A Wehrmacht soldier captured the scene with his movie camera. The hangman of Pančevo was a volunteer, a member of the local German minority, a plumber by trade. On the other side of the wall, Wehrmacht soldiers carried out the rest of the executions. The Wehrmacht generals held at Trent Park were completely clear that they had violated fundamental rules of humanity, at least according to Ferdinand Heim, longtime chief of staff to General von Reichenau. One of his fellow prisoners tells him about Babi Yar near Kiev, where both had served. Special task forces there had murdered more than 30,000 Jews.
Even if the figures are incorrect, I think that these are things that can be referred to as criminal, or even as completely mad and insane.
Just as I have responsibilities to my family and to my nation, naturally I also have to observe certain rules of humanity. There is absolutely no doubt about that. I can't just behave like a wild animal.
General von Koltitz, who had been a field commander on the Eastern Front like Reichenau, had always distanced himself from Hitler and his party. As a prisoner of war, he takes time to reflect and is the only one to say out loud what the others hardly dare to think, that the generals did not live up to their responsibilities.
We all share the guilt. We went along with everything. And we half took the Nazis seriously, instead of saying, "To hell with you and your stupid nonsense." I misled my soldiers into believing this rubbish. I feel utterly ashamed of myself. Perhaps we bear even more guilt than these uneducated animals.
The ordinary soldiers who put their lives on the line are often not up to the moral and mental demands made on them. As the war goes on, their inhibitions are progressively released. Max Gotthard had already witnessed the harsh realities of war in France. He's now serving in Italy. The soldiers are engaged in a fighting retreat. Since Mussolini was deposed and Italy broke off its alliance with Germany, the Allies have been advancing from the southern tip of Italy. The Germans are constantly under attack from partisans.
Wir hatten nachher auf dem Rückmarsch einen Major Wiegand. Das war ein Feigling ersten Ranges. Der hat dann in Norditalien, das muss nördlich von Florenz gewesen sein, hat er in den Dörfern die Männer nach Deutschland geschickt zur Zwangsarbeit, um dort diese oder jene Frau zu erobern und Ähnliches. Das weiß ich ganz genau. Wie weit das jetzt Partisanen weiß, aber die Partisanen haben sich natürlich so weit wie möglich dann gerächt, wenn sie jemanden erwischten.
The Wehrmacht's constant fight against the partisans is no solution. Rather, it's the source of the problem.
Wir fanden da manchmal 3 Kameraden, die hatten die Kehle durchgeschnitten. Aber sie konnten ja niemanden erfassen. Die kannten sich ja aus in ihrem Gelände, wir aber nicht. Und das war deren Vorteil.
In Tuscany, at the headwaters of the River Arno, shots are occasionally exchanged with the partisans. On April the 11th, 1944, 2 Germans are killed. In such cases, the Wehrmacht always respond in the same way.
Dann hieß es antreten und durchkämmen. Also das Gebiet wurde dann durchkämmt, also in Linie. Und wer erwischt wurde von denen, wurde gnadenlos umgebracht.
At dawn, on April the 13th, 1944, soldiers of the Hermann Göring Division surround the scattered groups of houses of the village of Vallucciole.
Sono stato infatti il giorno, sentì bussare alla porta, si aprì la porta, erano in 2. Come? E giù mi accompagnarono, fui il primo di casa mia, mi accompagnarono a calcio di sedere giù nelle piazze di Vallucciole. Tutta la gente vedo impauriti. Vidi la mia zia con un bambino al collo, uno di sopra con il fucile gli spara e l'ammazzò. Poi un giovanotto circa 10-12 anni così, non so, dall'era, era giovane, era ritto, arriva uno con la pistola, la mia nonna era morta in casa di Tognelli, la mia mamma era morta in sala, la mia moglie era morta fra la toilette e l'armadio, con il bambino al collo.
By evening, 108 civilians lie dead, among them 43 women and 22 children. This is not an isolated case. Soldiers of the Wehrmacht killed 10,000 civilians in Italy. Max Gotthard was only a witness at such atrocities, but his final analysis is extremely self-critical.
Ich bin als junger, hoffnungsfreudiger Mann, ich hatte immer Interesse für Literatur, für Musik, für all den Dingen und muss jetzt in den Krieg und bin als Mörder zurückgekommen.
People are destroyed, and so is the spirit of civilization. With the Allies poised to enter Paris, Hitler issues an absurd order.
Paris must not fall into the enemy's hands, but if it does, he must find nothing but a field of ruins.
Dietrich von Koltitz is now Wehrmacht commander in Paris. He is to carry out the order, as he recalls in Trent Park.
Flatten Paris with 500 men. Those were my orders.
I was also given that order.
Paris is to be flattened. All the bridges are to be blown up.
Yes, the man is insane.
General von Koltitz defies Hitler's order. Taken prisoner in Paris, he's treated well. Shortly before his surrender, he had secretly arranged a truce with the French resistance. This is the same man who, by his own admission, allowed Jews to be murdered. Sometimes good and evil are not far apart. He wouldn't have had the resources to destroy Paris anyway. He tells his fellow prisoners how he responded to the destruction order.
I said, I have no cannons. I have no explosives. All I have is his useless bow and arrow, the 98 infantry rifle. Yesterday morning, when I handed over, I could see only one machine gun firing. But how I'm supposed to set the Louvre on fire with that, or raise the Chambre de Députés to the ground, I'm not quite sure.
Koltitz was released in 1947 and lived until 1966. He was buried with military honors. Walter von Reichenau, who had let the children die in Bila Tserkva, suffered a stroke. He was killed when the aircraft taking him to hospital crashed. He no longer had to justify his actions. Eberhard Wildermuth, caught up in the reprisal murders in Serbia, joined the Free Democratic Party after the war. He was Minister of Housing at the time of his death in 1952. Max Gotthard spent a short time as prisoner of the Americans. After the war, aged 26, he could finally pursue his true vocation, bookseller. Peter Schilling tried to stir up resistance to the Wehrmacht in France in the latter stages of the war. After 1945, he got into trouble in both parts of Germany. Since 1962, he's been living in the Netherlands. There was resistance to Hitler in the higher ranks of the Wehrmacht as well. Was it the atrocities they had witnessed that forced them to act? Or was it the changing course of the war?